A black woman rolled into a bank in her wheelchair, asking politely to see the manager. The receptionist smiled, but every word dripped with subtle dismissal, suggesting she didn't belong. In front of the whole lobby, the woman was treated like a problem instead of a client, but minutes later the room froze when she revealed the truth and showed everyone who really held the power. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The morning mist still clung to the windows of Riverbank Financial's Westford branch when Amara Johnson arrived at 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. She paused outside the gleaming glass facade, her wheelchair positioned to study the polished brass nameplate that read Guardian Financial Group, serving our community. Since 1952. The irony wasn't lost on her. Today would determine exactly which part of the community they truly served. The automatic doors opened with a gentle whoosh as her wheelchair approached the sensors. Inside, the lobby showcased everything a successful regional bank should be: marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, leather furniture arranged in conversation clusters, and oil paintings of the town's founding fathers watching over transactions with stern approval. The morning rush was in full swing. Business suits clutching coffee cups, retirees reviewing investment statements, young families discussing mortgage options. Amara maneuvered through the space with practiced efficiency, her weathered canvas bag balanced carefully on her lap. Her simple cardigan showed the honest wear of someone who prioritized comfort over fashion. Her jeans were practical rather than stylish, and nothing about her suggested the kind of wealth this branch was clearly designed to attract. The lightweight aluminum wheelchair spoke of durability rather than luxury, functional mobility equipment rather than high-end medical technology. 6 months of meticulous preparation had brought her to this moment. After building Guardian Financial from a small community bank into a regional powerhouse over 15 years, she had begun hearing whispers, complaints from disability advocacy groups, subtle patterns in customer accessibility surveys, resignation letters that hinted at cultural problems without naming them directly. Today's assessment would either validate those concerns or put them to rest forever. She wheeled up to the reception desk, noting how the morning light illuminated the nameplate: Megan Alcott, Senior Customer Service Representative. Welcome, how can I help? The brass lettering gleamed with the same pride as everything else in the lobby. Megan looked up from her computer screen, and her expression underwent a subtle but noticeable shift as she took in the wheelchair and its occupant. The practiced customer service smile remained, but something behind her eyes changed, a flicker of discomfort, calculation, and barely concealed impatience. Good morning, how can I assist you today? I'd like to speak with the branch manager when he has a moment, Amara said, her voice carrying the neutral politeness of someone making a reasonable request. The smile remained fixed, but Megan's eyes performed a rapid assessment: worn canvas bag, casual cardigan, practical wheelchair, no obvious signs of significant wealth or status. The evaluation took 3 seconds, just long enough for assumptions to crystallize into a predetermined category of customer. Of course. Do you have an appointment scheduled with Mr. Colton? I don't, but I have some important documents that require his attention. Something shifted in Megan's demeanor, not dramatic, but noticeable to anyone paying attention. Her voice maintained its professional warmth while cooling by several degrees. She leaned slightly back in her chair, creating physical distance as if disability might be contagious. I see. Well, Mr. Colton's calendar is quite full today with our premium account holders. What type of documents are these? Perhaps I can direct you to one of our customer service representatives, or maybe you'd prefer information about our community banking programs. We have several resources specifically designed for individuals in your situation. The phrase individuals in your situation carried subtle weight, reducing a complex human being to a single characteristic and implying a separate lesser category of service. Near the loan consultation area, 72-year-old William Turner shifted in his leather chair and glanced at his watch. He'd been waiting 28 minutes for his appointment, watching as 3 other customers who'd arrived after him had been ushered directly into offices. As a former civil rights attorney who'd used a walking stick since his stroke 3 years ago, he'd developed a keen eye for the subtle choreography of ableism mixed with racial discrimination. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. At a nearby customer service desk, Eduardo Vasquez paused in his conversation with a client. 3 years of working at this branch had taught him to recognize the almost imperceptible shift in tone that his colleague used with certain customers. His own sister used a wheelchair after a car accident, and he'd witnessed firsthand how quickly people's attitudes changed when mobility equipment entered the conversation. "These documents really do need to be handled personally," Amara said, placing her canvas bag more prominently on her lap, the universal signal that she had legitimate business to conduct. Megan didn't acknowledge the gesture. Instead, she glanced around the lobby as if looking for assistance in handling what she clearly viewed as an uncomfortable situation. "Ma'am, I want to be completely transparent with you about our procedures. We serve a very specific client base here, people with significant investment portfolios, complex mortgage needs, commercial banking relationships." She gestured toward the waiting area where well-dressed customers read financial publications. "Without an established premium account or scheduled appointment, I simply cannot interrupt Mr. Colton's day, and honestly, given the nature of your circumstances, you might find our community partners better equipped to help with accessibility concerns or disability-related financial assistance." The assumption was clear: wheelchair equals financial hardship, special programs, charity rather than legitimate banking. From her seat by the window, Dorothy Chen looked up from her retirement planning brochure. At 75, she'd emigrated from Taiwan as a young woman and spent 50 years building a successful small business with her late husband. Her own experience with a temporary wheelchair after hip surgery had taught her how quickly society's perception could shift based on mobility. Something about this interaction was triggering old familiar alarms. "I understand you have procedures," Amara said with patience that seemed to frustrate Megan more than anger would have. "But these documents are time-sensitive." Megan's professional mask slipped another notch. Her voice dropped to what she apparently considered a confidential tone, though it carried clearly across the marble lobby. "Look, I'll be direct with you. We get a lot of walk-ins with various situations. Some involve legitimate banking business. Others are requests for assistance with medical bills, disability benefit questions, that sort of thing." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Without proper documentation of significant assets, I can't prioritize you over our established clients who have legitimate business needs." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on what she might have thought was kindly condescension. "There are other branches that specialize in community programs, and there are social services that might be better equipped to handle your particular challenges. They understand the unique needs that people in wheelchairs often have." The phrase "particular challenges" hung in the air like a judgment, reducing a complex human being to a medical condition that required special handling rather than simply respectful service. "What makes you think I need social services?" Amara asked quietly. The question caught Megan off guard. She'd expected either grateful compliance or frustrated departure, not a direct challenge to her assumptions. "Well, based on your presentation and the fact that I naturally assumed that you might be dealing with medical expenses or disability-related financial issues." She gestured vaguely at the wheelchair as if it explained everything. "People in your condition often have special circumstances that require different types of assistance." Eduardo stood up from his desk, his conscience finally overriding his caution. His sister's voice echoed in his mind. "The worst part isn't the wheelchair, Eddie. It's how people stop seeing you as a person the moment you sit down in it." "Miss Alcott, perhaps we could just let Mr. Colton take a quick look at the documents. It wouldn't take more than a few minutes." Megan's response was swift and sharp. "Eduardo, I appreciate your input, but I'm perfectly capable of managing reception duties. Perhaps you should focus on your own client base rather than questioning established procedures for handling challenging situations." The dismissal carried an edge that made Eduardo's hands clench involuntarily. The word challenging wasn't about procedures, it was about people, specifically people whose mere presence in the lobby was being treated as a problem to be managed rather than customers to be served. Dorothy Chen had heard enough. She stood up slowly, her 75-year-old frame carrying the dignity of someone who'd faced down prejudice in multiple forms. "Excuse me, but this young lady has been perfectly polite. She's simply asking to speak with the manager. I don't understand what the problem is." The lobby fell quieter as other customers began to notice the developing tension. A mother with her teenage son looked up from their college savings consultation, A businessman lowered his Wall Street Journal. The normal hum of banking business gave way to the uncomfortable awareness that something significant was happening. Megan felt the room's attention like heat on her back. Being challenged publicly by customers triggered something deeper than professional annoyance. It felt like insubordination from people who should be grateful for any accommodation at all. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure everyone could hear, "I need you to understand that this bank has procedures in place for good reasons. We've had issues with people coming in with unrealistic expectations about what services we can provide, sometimes trying to access programs they don't qualify for." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Amara's wheelchair. "Some individuals have special needs that require specialized assistance, and we want to make sure they get connected with the right resources rather than wasting everyone's time with requests we can't fulfill." She looked directly at Dorothy Chen. "If you want to maintain your account in good standing, I suggest you allow me to handle customer service according to our established guidelines for different types of clients." The threat was unmistakable. Speak up for others and face potential consequences to your own banking relationship. Dorothy felt the familiar chill of being told to know her place, but she also felt something else, the memory of every time she'd stayed silent and later regretted it. William Turner had heard enough. He stood up slowly, his walking stick providing support, and addressed Megan directly. "Young lady, I've been sitting in this lobby for 35 minutes watching you process customers. I've observed patterns in how you determine priority, and I don't like what I'm seeing." His voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, who understood the subtle mechanisms of discrimination because he'd fought them his entire career and faced them personally since his stroke. "I've been banking with Guardian Financial for 12 years. I know what respectful service looks like, and this isn't it." Megan felt the control of the situation slipping away. Multiple customers were now questioning her judgment publicly, and her authority was being undermined by people she'd categorized as problems rather than valued clients. The professional facade cracked further. "Sir, if you have specific complaints about our service, you're welcome to file them through proper channels. But I will not have customers disrupting our business environment or making unrealistic demands on our staff." She turned back to Amara with renewed aggression. "And you need to understand that I have significant authority in this bank's computer system. I can flag accounts for suspicious activity, note patterns of problematic behavior, and yes, I can restrict access to Guardian Financial services across our entire network." The threat was now explicit. The teenage boy in the corner whispered to his mother, "Is she allowed to say that?" His mother shushed him, but her own face showed growing concern and anger. Furthermore, Megan continued, emboldened by what she perceived as her own authority, "People need to understand that this institution serves qualified clients with established financial relationships. We're not a social service agency or a medical assistance program." She gestured around the lobby as if addressing a crowd. "Some people seem to think they can roll in here and demand special treatment based on sympathy or guilt, but that's not how business works. Banks have standards, and those standards exist for legitimate reasons." Her eyes fixed on Amara's wheelchair with undisguised disdain. "We deal with documented creditworthiness, verified assets, and clients who can handle their financial affairs independently. That's just reality." The words settled over the room like a toxic cloud. The casual dehumanization, the open threat to use institutional power as a weapon, the clear implication that people with disabilities were inherently less capable, it was all laid bare for everyone to witness. Eduardo could no longer contain himself. He stepped away from his desk, his voice shaking with controlled anger and personal pain. "Miss Alcott, what you're saying is completely inappropriate. This is discrimination, and I won't stand here and watch it happen." "Eduardo," Megan snapped, "you are out of line. I am handling this situation according to bank policy. If you have a problem with that, perhaps you should reconsider whether you're suited for this professional environment where difficult decisions have to be made." The implication was clear: question the hierarchy and face consequences to your own employment. Eduardo felt the familiar squeeze of being caught between conscience and survival, but this time something was different. This time the injustice was too blatant to ignore, too personal to stomach. Marcus, the teenage boy, looked at his mother with confusion and growing anger. "Mom, she's being really messed up, isn't she? That's discrimination against disabled people." The words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Discrimination, direct, clear, undeniable. "How dare you?" Megan's voice rose to a level that made heads turn throughout the lobby. "I am not discriminating against anyone. I am following established procedures for handling different types of customer situations. I resent the implication that." "Then explain the procedures," William Turner interrupted, his voice cutting through her protests with legal precision. "Explain why I've been waiting 42 minutes while customers who arrived after me were served immediately. Explain why this woman's legitimate request to see a manager has been met with assumptions about her financial capability based solely on her mobility equipment." Dorothy Chen found her voice again, strengthened by the coalition forming around her. "I've watched this too. The assumptions, the different treatment, the way you talk to people like they're problems to be solved rather than customers to be served. We all see what's happening here." Megan realized she was losing control completely. Multiple customers, and even a colleague, were united against her, publicly calling her behavior discriminatory. Her response was to double down with the desperation of someone whose worldview was being challenged. "This is exactly what I mean," she declared, her voice reaching every corner of the lobby. "People come in here trying to create drama, making accusations when they don't get special treatment, trying to manipulate staff through guilt and political correctness." She pointed at Amara with a perfectly manicured finger. "This person rolled in here with no appointment, no established relationship, demanding to see the manager immediately. When I explained our procedures, suddenly I'm accused of discrimination. This is a business, not a charity." The phrase "rolled in here" struck the room like a physical blow, the casual cruelty of reducing a person to their mobility equipment, shocking even customers who'd been trying to ignore the confrontation. That was the moment Amara Johnson decided she'd seen enough. For 15 years, she'd built Guardian Financial with a vision of universal accessibility, banking services that served everyone regardless of physical ability, race, or economic status. She'd started with a single location in a struggling neighborhood, offering services to entrepreneurs with disabilities who couldn't get approval elsewhere, first-time homebuyers who'd been overlooked by other institutions, and small business owners who faced multiple barriers to financial inclusion. The success of those early clients had provided the capital for expansion, and each new branch had been designed not just for physical accessibility, but for cultural inclusion that recognized the full humanity and potential of every customer who walked or rolled through the door. But growth had required delegation, and delegation had apparently allowed toxic attitudes to take root. What she was witnessing wasn't just individual prejudice, it was systematic ableism that threatened everything she'd worked to build. The canvas bag in her lap contained more than just her corporate documents. It held 15 years of quarterly reports showing how inclusive banking had driven their success, demographic analyses proving that accessible businesses were more profitable than exclusive ones, and community impact studies demonstrating how universal design strengthened entire regions. More importantly, it contained evidence from her months of investigation, patterns of differential treatment across 17 branches, resignation letters from employees with disabilities citing hostile work environments, and customer complaints that had been filed but never properly addressed. She'd come to Westford hoping to find that the problems were isolated, that most of her branches maintained the inclusive culture she'd tried to establish. Instead, she'd discovered discrimination so blatant that it was performed as entertainment for an audience. The room waited in tense silence as Amara placed both hands deliberately on the armrests of her wheelchair and straightened her posture with the bearing of absolute authority. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality that made everyone pause, not anger, but something far more dangerous, power backed by irrefutable proof. "You're absolutely correct about one thing, Miss Alcott," she said quietly, but her words carried to every corner of the silent lobby. "This is a business. It's time everyone understood exactly what kind of business this is." She opened her canvas bag with deliberate care, revealing documents that caught the light like promises of consequence. Corporate seals, legal letterhead, stock certificates, board resolutions, the unmistakable symbols of ultimate authority. "My name is Amara Johnson," she said, her voice cutting through the absolute silence like a blade. "I am not here seeking disability services, medical bill assistance, or charity of any kind." She held up the first document, a certificate of incorporation bearing her name as founder and the corporate seal of Guardian Financial Group. "I am the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Guardian Financial Group. This branch, Miss Alcott, along with every other Guardian branch in this region, reports directly to me." The silence that followed was so profound that the building's air circulation system sounded like a windstorm. Someone's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor. A pen clattered to rest. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang unanswered. "Oh my God," Dorothy whispered, her hands pressed to her mouth in shock and vindication. William Turner's eyes widened with recognition and grim satisfaction. Eduardo felt his knees go weak with relief and understanding of what he'd just witnessed. The mother pulled her son closer, both of them processing the magnitude of justice they were about to see unfold. But Megan stood frozen behind her counter, mouth opening and closing soundlessly, her mind struggling to process the complete inversion of everything she thought she understood about power, authority, and her own position in the hierarchy she'd been so confident of controlling. Furthermore, Amara continued, her voice growing stronger as she revealed the full scope of her investigation. "I didn't arrive here as an ordinary customer seeking services. I came here conducting a comprehensive assessment of discriminatory practices that have been reported at this branch and 16 others in our network." She pulled out additional documents, complaint reports, statistical analyses, resignation letters. "For 6 months I have been investigating patterns of differential treatment based on disability status, race, and perceived economic capability. What I witnessed here today exceeded even my worst expectations based on those reports." The manager's office door burst open as Brian Colton finally emerged, having heard voices rising beyond the normal level of business discussion. When he saw the corporate documents spread across the counter and recognized the official Guardian financial seal, his face went through its own rapid spectrum of colors: confusion, recognition, horror, and the sickening understanding that his career was hanging by a thread. "Miss Johnson," he stammered, crossing the lobby in quick strides while his eyes took in the wheelchair with obvious discomfort. "I had no idea you were conducting an assessment today. If I had known you were coming, I would have ensured proper accommodations, and, if you had known I was watching, would your employees' behavior have been different?" Amara interrupted, her question cutting to the heart of the problem. "Because that's precisely the issue. This is how your customers are treated when you think no one important is watching." She gestured around the lobby, where customers and staff stood frozen in the aftermath of revelation. "Everyone in this room has now seen exactly how this institution operates when it believes there will be no consequences for discrimination based on disability and race." Brian's face reddened as he began to understand the full scope of the disaster. His eyes kept flickering uncomfortably between Amara's face and her wheelchair, as if he couldn't quite process that authority could exist in this particular configuration. "Miss Johnson, I assure you that Miss Alcott's behavior does not represent our values or our training. This is an isolated incident that—" "Is it isolated?" Amara interrupted, pulling out a thick folder of documentation. "Because I have complaint reports from 17 branches showing similar patterns. I have resignation letters from employees with disabilities citing hostile work environments. I have statistical analyses showing significant disparities in service quality, wait times, and access to premium banking services based on disability status and racial demographics." The weight of implications settled over Brian like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about one employee's bad behavior, it was about systematic problems that could trigger ADA violations, civil rights lawsuits, federal investigations, and the complete destruction of the bank's reputation. "Mr. Turner," Amara said, turning toward William with respect and recognition, "you were kept waiting for 44 minutes while customers who arrived after you were served immediately. The pattern correlates directly with both racial demographics and your use of mobility assistance equipment, as documented by our security cameras." William nodded grimly, leaning on his walking stick. "I've seen it before, Miss Johnson. Different generation, same old tactics. Add a disability into the mix, and it gets even worse." "Mrs. Chen," she continued, acknowledging Dorothy's courage, "you were threatened with account closure for the simple act of defending basic human dignity. That represents a direct abuse of institutional power designed to silence opposition to discriminatory practices. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of vindication for a lifetime of quiet battles against prejudice in all its forms. "Mr. Vasquez," Amara said, turning to Eduardo with recognition of his moral courage, "you attempted to intervene when you witnessed discrimination against a person with disabilities, only to be dismissed and threatened with professional consequences. That pattern of silencing good employees who try to do the right thing has contributed directly to the toxic culture documented in this report." Eduardo felt a complex mix of relief and vindication, understanding finally that his instincts had been correct and that speaking up had been the right choice despite the professional risks. He thought of his sister, how proud she'd be that he'd stood up when it mattered. As security personnel appeared to escort Megan from the building, she was still too shocked to speak or move on her own. Amara addressed the broader implications of what had occurred. "What happened here today represents a betrayal of everything Guardian Financial was founded to achieve," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the lobby. "This institution was built on the principle of universal accessibility, the idea that strong communities are built when everyone has access to financial services regardless of their physical abilities, background or appearance." She held up quarterly reports showing the success of inclusive banking practices. "Our most profitable branches are those that serve diverse communities effectively, including people with disabilities. Our highest customer satisfaction scores come from locations that treat every client with dignity, regardless of how they navigate the world. Our strongest loan performance comes from entrepreneurs with disabilities and small business owners that other banks overlook." The business case for inclusion was as compelling as the moral case, and everyone in the lobby could understand both. "Miss Alcott," she said, addressing Megan directly as security prepared to escort her out, "your employment with Guardian Financial is terminated immediately. But more than that, your behavior today will become a case study used throughout our system to demonstrate exactly what we will not tolerate." Megan finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper of bewildered desperation. "I don't understand. I was following procedures. I was protecting the bank's interests. I was just being realistic about what different people need. You were weaponizing your position to humiliate people based on their disability and race," Amara replied with devastating clarity. "You reduced human beings to medical conditions and stereotypes. You made assumptions about capability based on mobility equipment. You used language designed to exclude and diminish people who didn't fit your narrow definition of worthy clients." She paused, letting the full weight of accountability settle. "That's not policy, Miss Alcott. That's ableism mixed with racism, and prejudice in any form has no place in any institution I lead." As security escorted Megan toward the exit, she turned back once with a final desperate attempt at justification. "This isn't fair. I was just being practical. People in wheelchairs do have different needs, and you were trying to exclude people based on your own prejudices and discomfort," Amara replied firmly. "Real accommodation means serving everyone with equal dignity while providing whatever accessibility supports they might need. What you were doing was the opposite. It was exclusion disguised as helpfulness, discrimination masked as practicality." The door closed behind Megan with a soft pneumatic sigh, but the impact of her departure rippled through the lobby like a stone dropped in still water. Brian stood in the aftermath, understanding that his own leadership had allowed this culture to develop, and that his career now depended on demonstrating he could change it. His eyes still showed discomfort when looking directly at Amara's wheelchair, revealing his own unconscious biases. "Miss Johnson, I take full responsibility for allowing this environment to develop. I should have seen the patterns, should have addressed the complaints, should have ensured that all our staff understood proper protocols for serving customers with disabilities." "Serving customers, period," Amara corrected firmly. "Customers with disabilities don't need special protocols beyond basic accessibility accommodations. They need the same respectful service as everyone else. The moment you start thinking of people with disabilities as a separate category requiring special handling rather than simply human beings deserving equal dignity, you've already lost the thread." She turned to address the entire lobby one final time. "Everyone here witnessed something important today. You saw how quickly prejudice can escalate when it goes unchallenged, how disability discrimination intersects with racial discrimination to create compound barriers. You also saw how ordinary people can stand up to injustice even when it might cost them personally." She nodded toward William Turner, Dorothy Chen and Eduardo with deep respect. 3 people in this room chose courage over comfort today. They spoke up against discrimination even when they thought it might have personal consequences. That's how change really happens, one person at a time choosing to do what's right. But she reserved special recognition for Marcus, the teenager whose direct language had cut through all the adult euphemisms. Young man, you did something very powerful today. You named disability discrimination clearly, instead of pretending it was something else. You refused to accept that unequal treatment was just procedure or policy. Keep that clarity as you grow up. The world needs people who can see injustice plainly and aren't afraid to call it what it is. Marcus nodded seriously, understanding that he'd witnessed and participated in something that would shape his understanding of justice and disability rights for the rest of his life. As Amara prepared to leave, she pulled out one final document, a comprehensive reform plan that had been months in development. Mr. Colton, this branch will serve as a pilot program for systematic change throughout our network. New accessibility protocols, disability awareness training, community outreach programs specifically designed to serve people with disabilities, and accountability measures that ensure today's discrimination never happens again. She handed him the reform plan, its weight both literal and metaphorical. You have 30 days to implement these changes and demonstrate measurable improvements in customer satisfaction across all demographic groups, including customers with disabilities. Your continued employment depends on your success in creating the inclusive culture this community deserves. Brian accepted the document with the understanding that he was being given both an opportunity and a final warning. I won't let you down, Miss Johnson. This branch will become a model for how accessible banking should work. See that it does, she replied, because the cameras recorded everything that happened here today, and that footage will be used for training throughout our system. Every employee will see exactly what ableism looks like and exactly what happens when basic human dignity is forgotten. She gathered her documents, the evidence that had transformed her from dismissed problem to ultimate authority in the course of a single conversation. The security footage will also be made available to disability rights organizations, civil rights groups, and anyone else who needs to understand what modern discrimination looks like in professional settings. As she maneuvered her wheelchair toward the exit, the lobby remained unusually quiet. Not the silence of tension, but the profound quiet that follows revelation and transformation. Some of you passed an important test today, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the space. You stood up for what was right even when you thought it might cost you something personally. Others learned that staying silent in the face of injustice has its own consequences, but everyone gets a chance to do better tomorrow. At the threshold, she turned her wheelchair back for one final observation that would be remembered long after the last witness left the building. This was never really about me. I can roll into any bank in this city and eventually be treated with respect because of who I am and what I represent. This was about how you treat people when you think they can't fight back, when you believe they don't matter, when you assume their disability makes them less capable, less deserving, less human. She paused, letting the lesson settle into every conscience present. Character isn't revealed in how we treat those who can help us advance our careers or improve our status. It's revealed in how we treat those we believe cannot hurt us, cannot help us, cannot make us or break us professionally. How we treat the person in the wheelchair. How we treat the elderly man with a walking stick. How we treat anyone who doesn't fit our narrow definition of normal. The automatic doors opened with a soft whisper, morning sunlight streaming into the lobby like hope made visible. Remember that the next time you have power over someone who seems powerless. Remember that dignity isn't earned by physical ability or wealth or appearance. Remember that every human being deserves respect simply because they are human, regardless of how their body works or what equipment they need to navigate the world. As Amara Johnson rolled out into the sunshine, her wheelchair moving with quiet dignity across the threshold and into the morning light, the lobby remained in contemplative silence. The story of what happened that morning would spread through social media, disability rights networks, local news outlets, and corporate communications with the speed of truth finally told. The security footage would become required viewing in business schools, disability awareness programs, and diversity training across the country. The names of those who stood up, William Turner, Dorothy Chen, Eduardo Vasquez, young Marcus, would be remembered as examples of everyday heroism in the face of systematic injustice. But Megan Alcott's name would also be remembered, serving as a cautionary tale about how quickly prejudice can destroy a career when it encounters accountability. In the hours and days that followed, applications for employment at Guardian Financial would surge, particularly from qualified candidates with disabilities who had previously experienced discrimination at other institutions. Customer satisfaction scores would improve dramatically across all demographic groups. Community trust, once shattered, would slowly begin to rebuild through actions rather than promises. The branch would undergo a complete physical accessibility audit, revealing dozens of barriers that had been invisible to non-disabled staff. Ramps would be improved, service counters would be lowered, accessible parking would be expanded, and visual and auditory accommodations would be installed throughout the facility. More importantly, the cultural transformation would be profound and lasting. Eduardo would prove exceptional in his new role as branch manager, implementing policies that ensured every customer received dignified service regardless of ability, race, or perceived economic status. His sister would visit the branch and tell him through tears of pride that he'd done exactly what needed to be done. William Turner would become a community advocate, speaking at churches, community centers, and civic organizations about the importance of standing up against all forms of discrimination. His testimony about the 44 minutes he spent waiting would become part of civil rights documentation about intersectional prejudice in modern settings. Dorothy Chen would volunteer her time training other seniors to recognize and report discriminatory practices, her quiet courage inspiring others to find their voices when injustice occurred. Her story would remind people that heroism often comes in small packages and quiet voices, but its impact can be revolutionary. And Marcus would carry the lesson of that morning throughout his life, understanding that naming injustice is the first step toward ending it, that silence in the face of discrimination makes everyone complicit, and that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to use it. He would become a disability rights advocate in college, always remembering the morning when he learned that the most powerful thing anyone can do is simply tell the truth about what they see. The test was over, but the real work of transformation had just begun. As security footage would show in training sessions, legal proceedings, and academic studies for years to come, what happened in the Westford branch that Tuesday morning was both an ending and a beginning. An ending of tolerance for discrimination disguised as procedure or practicality. A beginning of accountability that would reach every level of the organization and every corner of the community. Most importantly, it was proof that tests of character happen every day, in routine interactions between strangers, when people believe no one important is watching. On that day, everyone learned exactly what their character looked like under pressure, and the lessons learned would continue to ripple outward long after the last customer left the building. Some liked what they saw in themselves, others committed to fundamental change. All of them were forever altered by discovering they had been part of a test they never knew they were taking. The victory belonged not just to Amara Johnson but to every person who chose courage over comfort, justice over quiet complicity, and human dignity over institutional prejudice. They proved that systemic change begins with individual choice, one moment of moral courage at a time. In a small bank lobby in Westford, on what began as an ordinary Tuesday morning, extraordinary bravery met entrenched discrimination, and bravery won. The triumph would be remembered not just as corporate justice, but as proof that ordinary people possess extraordinary power when they refuse to normalize ableism and choose instead to demand the better, more accessible world they know is possible. The wheels of Amara's chair had rolled over more than just marble floors that day. They had rolled over assumptions, stereotypes, and the comfortable fiction that discrimination was a thing of the past. In their wake they left tire tracks of change that would guide others toward a more inclusive future, one rotation at a time.